Harriet Tubman has proved herself to be a historical figure. She overcame many obstacles and fought for everything that she believed was right. She helped free the lives of many. She will forever be remembered for the great things she has done. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery anywhere from 1820 to 1822. She was born in Dorchester County, Maryland. She was the daughter of Harriet Green and Benjamin Ross. Harriet Tubman's real name was Araminta Ross. People also like to call her Minty. Harriet had 8 different siblings. At the age of 5, Tubman's owner rented her out to neighbors as a domestic servant. At the age of 12, just 7 years later, she showed the signs of her resilience. She tried to stop her master from beating another slave that was getting beaten for trying to escape. Because of this, she was punished very severely. She was hit with a 2-pound weight, which gave her narcolepsy. This blow to the head fractured her skull, nearly killing her. She then was forced to work 2 days after. She was allowed no medical treatment during these times. This is when she started to see the effects of the blow. When she was hit in the head, she was given symptoms similar to narcolepsy and temporal lobe epilepsy. This created periods of time that she fell into a dream-like state. She hallucinated during these time periods. These episodes lasted half an hour to an hour. This affected her because it happened periodically throughout the day. She called these hallucinations visions. These visions range from hearing music and screams in her head to feeling like her skin is on fire. She still knew her surroundings while she was still in this state. The accident also caused regular headaches. These headaches were so bad and made things difficult for her. It made it difficult for her to work, and so she wasn't very valuable. She was very weak and slowly recovered with her strength. During this recovery time, she became very religious. After this, she had to persevere. Over time, Harriet grew stronger. She married John Tubman in 1844. At this time, John was a free black man. Just 5 years later, her owner Edward Brodus died. Because of this, his wife Eliza was left with a lot of debt that she needed to pay off. Tubman was so scared that she would be sold to the South because Eliza needed money. So, Tubman decided to escape to Philadelphia. She left during the night and had to travel 90 miles by foot to get there. While on her journey, she stopped at Underground Railroad safe houses. Here she was fed and was told where she needed to go next from different black and white abolitionists. She worked as a cook in hotels while she spent her time in Philadelphia. With the money she saved up, she wanted to use it to help save the rest of her family. She made her first stop back to Maryland to help her niece and her niece's children escape. Against many odds, they made it back safely. Just 1 year later, she came back to help free her husband John. He refused to go back with her and married someone else. She left her husband and found a group of slaves that really wanted to leave, so she took them to Pennsylvania. She made 13 trips and freed more than 70 slaves. During this process, she never lost a passenger. Also in the year of 1950, they created the Fugitive Slave Act. This made it difficult for Tubman to continue this process. What the Fugitive Slave Act was was different statutes that were passed that permitted the seizure and return of all slaves that ran away into another state. This forced them back to the original owner if they were caught. Traveling through the Underground Railroad was a long and hard process. The runaway slaves had to travel long distances by foot in a short period of time. This was so hard because they didn't have a lot of food, if they even had any at all. The weather wasn't always on their side. Sometimes they needed to go through the harshest of conditions. Whether it was rain or snow, they had to keep pushing. Wild animals also crossed their path from time to time. They had to fight them off and use them for the lack of the food that they had. The Underground Railroad was usually conducted by different kinds of free slaves, and in this case, it was Harriet Tubman. Her job was to get them from station to station safely. These stations could be located at homes and businesses. Other conductors varied from race, occupation, and income level. Different slave owners posted a $40,000 reward if she was caught dead or alive. As a matter of fact, it was becoming too dangerous for her to continue to bring the runaway slaves to northern United States. So she had to start bringing them to Canada. She decided that she also needed to move to Canada. In 1854, she sent a letter to Jacob Jackson. Jacob Jackson could read, write, and was a free black man. He lived by the rest of Tubman's family in Maryland. In this letter, she wrote that she was going to help her 3 brothers escape. In 1857, she had also brought her parents back with her and liberated most of her family. Liberating her parents was one of the last trips that Tubman had made. Her father, Benjamin, was being watched by slave owners. They believed that he was helping fugitive slaves, so they always kept a close eye on him. Although he was a free slave owners always watched him. Harriet's mother, on the other hand, wasn't free. Harriet was trying to bring her parents up north. During all of her trips, she kept multiple things with her and used many tricks. These tricks helped her be so successful in all of her trips. She carried the drug paregoric. This drug was used for the babies so they wouldn't be crying during the trip. The runaway slaves were put in difficult situations where they couldn't have a baby crying and attracting attention to themselves. She also carried a gun. This gun was kept for two reasons: slave catchers and a warning for the slaves that wanted to turn around. There were plenty of times when people wanted to turn around during her trips and wanted to give up. Harriet couldn't let anybody do that. She would pull out a gun and say, "You'll be free or die a slave." Tubman didn't want the slaves to turn around. If the slaves got caught trying to escape or go back, they would tell the slave catchers everything. Tubman couldn't risk having her journeys destroyed because of a slave that wanted to turn around because they were scared. So she did what she had to do and threatened them with a gun.
You'll be free or die a slave.
She also used other types of tricks along the way. Sometimes she disguised herself as different people so people didn't know her identity. Still, at this time, she was highly wanted and couldn't afford to be caught. One time, she dressed like a man. Another, she carried chickens to make it seem like she was running errands. Other times, she dressed in a silk dress to make it seem like she was a free, middle-class woman. During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman joined the Union Army. Here, she was a nurse, cook, and a spy. While in Maryland, she learned remedies which could help many people in the war. At this time, there were many people who were dying from dysentery. Dysentery was a disease which leads to horrible diarrhea. Tubman did what she could to try and stop people from suffering from this illness. So one time, she searched for some of the same herbs that were grown in Maryland. These herbs were water lilies and crane's bill. With this, she made a gross brew which was supposed to help these patients. She gave this to a dying man, and after a while, he eventually lost his sickness. Harriet Tubman is also known as the Moses of her people. In a biblical story, Moses tried to lead the Jews to the promised land and out of slavery. This story is recognized by many people. Harriet Tubman is also called the Moses of her people for this very reason. William Lloyd Garrison was the first to call her this name. John Brown also had a name for her, and it was General Tubman. He gave her this name because over time she created her own network of Northern Underground Railway operatives and routes. In her older years, Harriet Tubman married Nelson Davis, who was a Union Army veteran. But Nelson died not long after. In the 1890s, she had brain surgery to help with the pain she dealt with most of her life from the 2-pound weight that hit her. The surgery didn't get rid of all the pain, but it took a good amount away. She created the Harriet Tubman Home in Auburn, New York. Here she took care of the epileptic, the blind, and the paralyzed. In 1913, Harriet Tubman died from pneumonia in Auburn, New York. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that Harriet Tubman is a historical figure. She has lived one of the roughest lives while still trying to make the most of it. Starting off, being born into slavery was very difficult. She showed how tough she was when she stepped in on the slave that was getting beaten for trying to run away. This was very risky and it put her whole life at risk. When she got the paperweight thrown at her, it was something that affected her for most of her life. It wasn't easy trying to be a conductor of the Underground Railroad with narcolepsy and temporal lobe epilepsy. It wasn't easy for her to return back to work within 2 days with this head injury. Most slave owners were brutal and didn't care about what they did to their slaves. Just imagine living with a headache that you constantly had throughout your whole entire life. During this time, she became very religious, so it showed she couldn't let it get to her, and she needed to be thankful for what she has. The perseverance she had to go through to get up and get back to working after all these horrible things also qualifies her as a historical figure. She went her whole life with these awful headaches and visions that she had. She is so lucky that she never got caught. She is lucky that one of her visions never occurred while she was in the middle of something very serious. But she was willing to take that risk. Another thing that qualifies her as a historical figure would be the endless traveling she went through for the greater good. She was constantly going to the north and back to the south. She wasn't doing this just for the fun of it. She was doing this for the greater good to help free so many slaves that were going through a hard time. She traveled all the way back to help her husband be free from slavery. He was in a state where he couldn't leave because he had married someone else. Harriet Tubman did not let this get to her and decided to help other people instead. She could have gave up there after seeing her husband no longer wanting to be with her. She could have been selfish and turned back to go alone, but she wasn't. She kept her head up and found other people that were willing to leave and go on the journey with her. The selflessness she showed also qualifies her as a historical figure. Even with the Fugitive Slave Act, she still managed to help people out. She knew the danger she was about to go through, but she didn't let that get to her. There was a bounty that was put on her. She was worth $40,000 to them that she was caught. As of now, that is a lot of money. Just imagine how much money that was to people 150 years ago. She was constantly risking her life because people were always on the hunt for her. But she continued to help people out through the Underground Railroad. She never let anyone give up, and if they wanted to turn around, she wasn't going to let them. She pushed people so hard for their freedom. The fact that she joined the Union Army during the Civil War, after all that has happened in her life, really shows who she is. This shows that she wasn't done helping the people around her. This shows she was always searching for an opportunity to be the best person she could possibly be. She did many things in the Union Army that helped her become even more well known. Risking her life as a spy was something that she had adapted to during her lifetime. She had gotten away with sneaking around and staying away from slave catchers almost all of her life, so this job was a good fit for her. She also was a good nurse and cook. This was to help the people who were also fighting with her. She had learned many different remedies to help her be a great nurse, just like that brew that she had made that helped people suffering from a very bad illness. She was a very smart girl and learned a lot throughout her years. Her life was filled with love and fight for one another. There is no doubt that Harriet Tubman worked for everything that she did. Nothing came easy for her in her life. She remarried and started over. She started a house for different kinds of people to live in. They were usually blind and paralyzed. Here she took care of them because she was that kind of a lady. It wasn't until the end of her life that people saw the good that she was doing. She then passed away later in her life. But now, everyone can see and realize all the great things she has done for our country. She lived one of the toughest lives, but for her, it was just doing it for the greater of the people. There is many who also helped free slaves, but there is no one as successful as she is for having the story that she had. She helped so many slaves and brought them to safety. She never gave up and always had a plan. That's what makes Harriet Tubman a historical figure.